Hello, all you wonderful people. Great to have you back in my company. I've got a brilliant interviewee lined up for you today. I think you're going to love it. Full of mystery, secrets, drama, intrigue, fascinating stuff. It's really, quite honestly, the content here goes right to the heart of what really always captures my personal interest. This is what I'm all about. But before we get started, quick note about how you can show your support for the podcast. Simply check out my patreon.com site. As a paid up member, you get exclusive access to, great stuff. There's an exclusive question and answer session every week. There's tons of comment, political and more besides. There's history, there's archaeology, and there are no adverts. The link's in the notes below the video. I'd love to see you there. We also get support from our sponsors, Gold Bullion Partners. These are the people to talk to if you're thinking about investing in real physical gold or silver, coins and bars. One thing they say is buying gold and silver is about wealth preservation, safety and control, not about speculation. So, if you want to find out if it's the right move for you, get in touch with them via the link below. They'll talk you through it. Okay, time to meet my most excellent guest. My guest today is Jennifer Solignac. I will let Jennifer introduce herself. I came across Jennifer's name in connection with something about which I'm passionately interested, which is to say the discovery of another source of information about early Christianity, about the world from which Christianity as we know it emerged. It's another set of documents, but we'll get to that in the fullness of time. To begin with, let's just meet Jennifer. And Jennifer, hello and good morning to you. And maybe introduce yourself and explain how it is that you came to be connected with this fascinating subject.
Okay. Well, good morning, Neil. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm very grateful for that because it has been about 18 years that I've been trying to get this information out, along with a partner that I've been working with this for, David Elkington. And to some extent, it has gotten out in the media, but not nearly enough. And that's largely because it's been continued to be in dispute. And what the discovery actually was a collection of ancient books or codices that were found in caves in northern Jordan. And we were told around 2005 that they were actually found. But I didn't come across them until kind of late, I think it was September 2007.
When you say, if I can just jump in there, Jennifer, when you say came across them, for the benefit, I know how you're connected to these, but for the benefit of my audience, maybe if you just lay out, who you are. Simply, I know that you're a student of history and art history. I know that you've worked in various disciplines.
Yes, I'm not an obvious person in one way to come across this. It was just by chance because, my background is in European history with an emphasis on history of art. And I studied that in Paris and got my degree there. And I guess my background in people will want to know religiously. As to see if there's any bias there, but I do come from a Methodist family background, and I was very devout as a child because my grandparents were very devout, although my parents weren't particularly religious at all. But I think when I first came across, it was in, I think, 1996, Lawrence Gardner's book, Bloodline of the Holy Grail, and that kind of completely changed my view on everything. And I know it was a bestseller, and it showed me for the first time that religion is not how we think it is. And I actually went into shock for a little while because you're so entrenched in certain views, and it's not even if you're religious, but it's part of your cultural heritage, things that you believe, and it kind of makes you question everything then, which it did to me. And so I do appreciate that some of the information that I have, I don't want to shock people and have them kind of and contradict their faith or undermine that at all, because these codices are actually positive and they actually support Christian faith. So that's and that was my background. But other than that, after that, I just read everything I could possibly read on the subject matter. And so I became knowledgeable. I mean, not in no way an expert on it, but very knowledgeable. And then I ended up getting in contact with Lawrence Gardner and became his publicist, literary publicist. And then I had other authors, historians, come to me. And so I ended up doing that for a long time with various authors with similar kind of pursuits, esoteric history. And so even though I also did other books, much more politics and, not esoteric history. That was my real passion. And so I have been doing this for many years, reading this sort of book. So when I did come across these codices, I had somewhat of a background.
I'll just jump in again, just for the unfamiliar. Codices is the plural of codex, isn't it? Which is just another word for a book, rather than a scroll that you roll up. It's right. Different leaves or pages that are bound together in some way.
They're bound together, yes. And the codex, because usually they're also the first books would be codices, or a codex would be the earliest books, because when they were written, there weren't a lot of books around. They were kind of books for the very few who could read them. So then when I did come across these, and it was through a Sunday Times journalist in Oxfordshire who had been contacted, and I had done some work with him, and and it was just a friendly thing, going over for dinner, and he said he had some images to show. And so went upstairs, looked on his screen, and I was with David Elkington at the time, and we saw these images of what looked like vellum, but then this journalist said, no, it's not vellum, they're metal. And they had writings of very ancient inscriptions all over them and iconography, and they were bound by metal rings. And at first you look at them, and because there's no reference point for them, you just think, oh, what is this? And this has to be fake, because there's no reference point for them. And but they did look genuinely ancient. And so David was an independent scholar, but he took images back, and he started looking at them and realized that the language he determined to be Paleo-Hebrew, which is even older than ancient Hebrew. And only, as we discovered, there's only a handful of scholars in the world who can actually read them. And so
how old would Paleo? I mean, everyone associates Hebrew with being one of the languages of the Holy Land, but when you say kind of older Hebrew, when are we talking about people using that as a language?
Well, it actually was unlikely to have been a spoken language. It was the liturgical language from the First Temple of Solomon. So these books written in the Paleo-Hebrew were not meant to ever be read or understood by anyone other than high priests or that had actually had the knowledge of this, because they were secret teachings. And it's a bit like Latin is used still in the Catholic Church. Although people do speak Latin, it's not a totally secret language. You can learn it. But back then, I mean, very, very few people, it was only, like highly educated, and most of those were like the priests, were able to even read at all. So you've got this Sunday Times journalist who invites you. Yes. You're in for dinner, just a conversational thing. I've been made aware of something I think very interesting. You see it. How had the journalist become aware of them, and where had these metal books come from? Well, the journalist became aware of them through a friend of his wife's, who was a Palestinian museum curator at the time, and she got them at the time. It was all very mysterious, and we were only fed little bits of information at the time, and we were told that they came from Israel, and which later we found out they didn't. They came from Jordan, but everything was very hush-hush secretive, and that they were owned by an Israeli Bedouin. And I don't know what his connection is with her, but they knew each other. And so he was trying to find out what they were. He had bought them from some Bedouin in Jordan who had found them in caves in northern Jordan. And he bought a huge amount of the collection and smuggled it through into Israel. Now, he will deny that they came from Jordan because he smuggled them, but he did get caught a few times by the Jordanian military intelligence, and some of them were confiscated. And so that's how that all came about. And so he, to be fair to him, even though he did pay for them, he smuggled them. And I think he had the idea of selling some of them. He was also very interested in knowing what they were, and he a genuine interest. And the journalist, of course, wanted a scoop. So we formed a little team, and David was one of the scholars, and then he brought on a metallurgist, because we couldn't begin to approach kind of eminent scholars with this discovery unless we kind of did a little bit more research. Otherwise, you're just wasting their time and you look a bit silly. There was a meeting, and all of a sudden, this woman who had sent him, we didn't know she was about to show up, and we went to a meeting at his house, and she had come over from Israel, and she was there. And much to our surprise, she actually brought one with her. And I don't know how she managed to get it across customs, but she brought one. We were like shocked. And so she then handed it around, and we were around a table, and it was passed around the table to the various people that were there, myself, David, and there was a metallurgist. And it was incredible because it was so heavy. It was a tiny, tiny little book about the size of a palm, a small palm. But
like
yet
a
it was
playing card, maybe like cards that you play snap with.
Yeah,
that
some of them were
size.
about, because they're varying sizes. That would be about that, and some of them even a little bit smaller. And this one was a little bit smaller than a playing card, but a bit more square. But it had quite a lot of leaves in it, and it was very, very heavy. And I know it's going to sound woo-woo, but when I held it, you could actually feel like an energy emanating from it. And after all of us had kind of felt it and went around, and in the end, when we were about to leave, we all felt very dizzy. It was a very powerful feeling. So these are, at the end of the day, sacred documents. They would have belonged to, there are gold ones, and those would have come from inside the temple. And then they're originally the books of the Nazareans. What they actually are has been determined after years of kind of research. And when I say these things, this isn't me determining them. These are the academics who were studying.
When you say Nazarene, that's a loaded word.
It is a loaded word.
Let's have a shared understanding of what you and I, let's say, mean by that word.
Well, the Nazareans were the followers of Jesus. And Jesus was a Nazarene. He was the leader of this particular group of Nazareans who we believe lived in this cave site where the codices were found in northern Jordan. And there is, according to because David and I made an announcement on the BBC in 2011, and since then, a lot of people have just reached out and tried to get in contact. And I spoke with one young man who actually came from the village nearby where the codices were found. And he said that the village elders have documentation that Jesus and his followers did live in this area, this cave site. And I said, well, I asked him, I said, why haven't you shown this or told anybody before? And he said, we have, but nobody wants to know. And so
is the assertion then that these books were made during the lifetime of the man Jesus? Is that the idea?
Yes, that is the idea. And in fact, there are a couple of the eminent scholars in the group that believe that Jesus could have actually made some of them himself. And there's a passage in the Bible, I should have it on the top of my head, but I don't, where it mentions Jesus writing in the sand. And actually these books, to make these lead codices, you get wet sand, which is very compact, and then you write, because the Hebrew is written backwards, so you write probably with a stick or some kind of similar object, and you would write it backwards, and then the molten lead would have been poured into this mold, and that's how they made the codices. And if you go at a micro level, which one of our analysts, forensic analysts did, you can go and actually see the individual grains of sand still attached to the lead.
So hence the heaviness. These are
yeah. Oh, they're very heavy.
The pages of which are rolled out cast lead.
Yes, they're
hence
lead
the
plate.
weight.
Yes,
hence the weight of them. And what is? And you mentioned Paleo Hebrew,
yes,
which is this written language rather than a spoken tongue that would have been the written language of books that were being used in the first temple.
Yes.
In Jerusalem.
Yes.
So what did he say?
So, so
What are the
that
books about?
well, they're amongst the small scholars that were studying, they believe to be the secret teachings of Jesus. And it's not just the words that they say, because they're still being translated. And unfortunately, because of all this suppression and all of the attacks that the scholars who have come forward have been under, no one will kind of touch them now. So it's put kind of a hold on some of the translations. I mean, it's very possible that some of these scholars are working on them quietly. They just haven't published any of these translations. But we do have some of them, and one of them was Professor John Sawyer, who's a professor emeritus at Durham University, and he's one of the very few who can read Paleo-Hebrew, and he's translated. He said he could read it like a newspaper, and he said that he picked up passages from the Book of Numbers. He picked up passage from the Book of Daniel, but it's probably like the Book of Daniel would have come probably taken from the Codices rather than the other way around.
So we're talking about, in effect, arguably written material that became subsequently the source material, the reference books from which the Bible might have been in part compiled. Possibly,
because the Bible was actually compiled literally from the first Gospels from either 65 to 100 AD. And I don't think I may be wrong, any of the authors of the Gospels actually knew Jesus. Or whether they had access to these codices or not, it's hard to say. But I don't think that because they were written in Jesus's lifetime, so they wouldn't be writing an account of what happened to him like what the Gospels do. But they would have been more teaching the teachings of the liturgy, the church, and Jesus was he wasn't trying to start a new religion called Christianity. I mean, Paul's the one that did that. Basically, what Jesus was trying to do was bring back the liturgy from the first temple of Solomon, because the second temple in Jerusalem was it was very corrupt. That's hence the money changers, where he got angry because they were charging tithes and taxes and then animal sacrifices and the denigration of the woman and the kind of the goddess within the Judaic religion. And he was trying to reform all of that and to go back to the purity of the first temple of Solomon. So it's likely that these teachings would have come from that.
Now, you mentioned that you initially saw images on a screen, and then subsequently you saw one of these, and you held in your hand one of these codices. Where are the rest of them? How many are there, and where are they known to be?
Yeah, that is the question. There are quite a few of them. We saw and photographed that Hassan, this Israeli Bedouin, had about 35 of them. And since then, I've had a lot of other people contacting me with different ones, and they've been found in places throughout the Middle East, including in caves outside of Tripoli in Libya, caves outside of Mecca. They've been found in Turkey, Tunisia. So those we believe to be not as old as the ones found in Jordan. Those were probably Nazarenes, and then going out with, as missionaries, and kind of spreading the word throughout the Middle East. And they took codices with them. But the oldest ones were the ones found in Jordan. And those were the ones that we believe to be the books of the Nazarenes. And they've also tested for the corrosion analysis that was tested on these codices, these very ancient ones. The analyst Matthew Hood has said that in all of his career, he's a senior naval architect and metals expert. And his colleagues as well. They've never seen anything like this, because the crystals on the codices would have to take 1,800 to 2,000 years to develop. And they actually have gone back to their original mineral state. So they're very, very old. And he's 100% convinced. And unfortunately, we have done other tests. I mean, we've done an absolute multitude of various tests in different independent laboratories in in the UK, and some were done in the Getty Institute, and believe it was in Mexico, and it's in Jordan as well. And all of them have come back that they're ancient. And
you mentioned that metal books have been found in other locations,
yeah,
in Mecca and in other locations, but that these Jordanian led books, these codices that you're specifically talking about, I mean, are they this collection that the Israeli Bedouin had sold? Are they safe? Are whatever their veracity or not? Are they safely held somewhere by someone?
Well, that is the problem, and that is the real reason why in 2011, David and I went on, made this announcement on the BBC, and it was with the backing of a very senior member of the Jordanian royal family, as alongside the Director General of the Department of Antiquities, who's a renowned archaeometallurgist himself. And we agreed, even though the scholars were very hesitant to bring it out in public so early on before they'd had a chance to really study them, but we did it for their safety because they were being sold on the black market and they were disappearing. And so we thought if we did that announcement, and that was very much backed by authorities in Jordan, and they had agreed that they would, after that, make an announcement themselves. Because it was so political, they asked us if we would front it. And we agreed to do that kind of naively, not realizing that we would also then be the ones to receive all the backlash.
Given what you're talking about, are they sitting somewhere safely conserved? Whoever's got them, for good reasons or bad, is it thought that the Jordan Codices are sitting somewhere?
Yes, well, that's why we made this announcement, is to try and protect them, because the Jordanians had promised to then go and get them repatriated, and that just never happened. And so the really big, and it actually ended up being worse, because then it went out into the public, and then everyone knew that these existed and that they're authentic, and all of a sudden they become, everyone's interested because then they're valuable. We've basically had gone from these artifacts to these lead books. What are they? I mean, they're, nobody could imagine lead books would have any kind of a value, and all of a sudden they're determined to be the earliest Christian, Hebrew Christian books, and the only tangible objects from that period. And so they become valuable. And so then they become, they go on the black market. And the exact opposite happened. And not only did a lot of these books go missing, but the whole site where they came from all of a sudden became looted and was destroyed. A lot of the evidence, the archaeological evidence, was destroyed. So it was very, very upsetting. And we still, and this has been like, that was in 2011. So, and then the authorities promised us they were going to put guards on the site, and then that happened initially. And then the biggest problem of what happened to this was down to a young Oxford student named Peter Toneman from Wadham College, who saw an opportunity for himself, and he got in an article in the Times Literary Supplement, and he said he would stake his entire academic reputation that the whole collection of codices were modern forgeries. And even though he was a classicist, he was not a Hebrew scholar, he was not a biblical scholar, he was not a scientist, but because he was from Oxford, his voice went everywhere. And because he was the first one to step up and say they're fake, even though we had the Director General of the Department of Antiquities, who was, as I said, a leading archaeometallurgist. He did independent studies. We had done years of independent studies, scientific studies. We'd had some of the world's most eminent biblical scholars, all from Oxbridge, backing this. And he knew that. He was informed of that. And he went ahead and did it anyway. And it caused so much damage that that's when the Jordanians just dropped it and just said they were worried that they'd look foolish because this one young student basically made this declaration. And literally since that day, and then because he did that, a whole load of American evangelical scholars joined in, and they thought, okay, well, they can't make a name for themselves or study these codices because they weren't a part of this group. So they just started attacking them and attacking us. And because of that, the codices lost credibility. We lost credibility. And it's been a huge problem of just trying to regain that credibility. And
so wait a minute. So the only people, the student that you named there and others who have, let's say, rubbished the codices,
yes,
who have dismissed them,
yes,
haven't actually seen them.
no,
Far less conducted independent or any other scientific analysis of
no, they haven't seen
the
them.
metal of which they're made, they haven't. They've just dismissed them out of hand. So those who have dismissed them, whoever they are, have never seen them.
No, it was all opinion, and a lot of them were very young scholars. They were nowhere near in the league of the eminent scholars that were supporting the codices. But now in the day of internet, whoever has the loudest voice gets heard. And these eminent scholars, they're very quiet. They're not going to go out and put themselves, they're not seeking fame like these young scholars. And they won't. And because we were also attacked in such awful ad hominem attacks, and myself and David, particularly David, but also some of the scholars, including one, Professor Philip Davies, and sadly he's passed away, but he was one of the two, along with Robert Eisenman, who broke the embargo on the Dead Sea Scrolls. A very eminent professor, and he was also rubbished by them. And so a lot of the scholars just retreated. They wouldn't come out in public until many years later. Do
you or any of the rest of the group who are seeking to have more work done with these objects, do you have access to any of them? Is there so much as a lead page or a single codex to which any of you have access in terms of showing the existence of the collection? Well,
that's why after we made our announcement and all of this started to happen, there was a lot of problems behind the scenes in Jordan. So we were flown out there after the announcement to brief the Department of Antiquities, and so we did do that. And the director then at the time, he didn't tell us initially, but he knew that there was a lot of noise in the background and people were not happy that this came out, because normally small groups of people control when things come out, and they were not able to control the narrative. And we took them completely off guard by putting it out there. We kept very quiet about it intentionally with a very small group of scholars. And so they were very upset when this came out.
I'm immediately wondering if they've been destroyed, if they're sitting in the Vatican archives, or whatever. The things that tend to happen to Dead Sea Scrolls and Nag Hammadi and the rest of it. I mean,
yeah, well, that's what happened, because the director knew that there were shenanigans going on in the background. These were particularly by American research institutions, because the Americans have controlled archaeology in the Middle East since the 1960s, and they still are controlling it very much so. And they were very upset that they were not leading this and they were not informed. And so he knew that there was problems in the background. So he sent us back with a codex to take back to the UK, with a letter from the Department of Antiquities that we were going to take it back to get it tested, because he knew, it was very clever, that if we didn't, they were able, in Jordan, be able to say, oh, they're all fake. So if we took one back and had it tested, which we did at the University of Surrey, the Ion Beam Center, as well as the Croto Institute in the University of Sheffield, and subsequently other places as well, that they couldn't do that. They couldn't dispute it. And which is very,
where is that
very
one?
clever.
Where is that one now? That codex that was in your hands.
That's a whole other story. That's in itself, because we had it and we kept it because it was the only evidence that we had.
So there's one, and it's in, there's one exists and is safe.
Yes, it was back. There were, when we went, there were 25 of them, because the director, Dr. Zial Al-Sad, he told us, he said, go and pick one, whichever one you want. And so we went back in the room where they had, drawers that pull out they keep all the artifacts. And there was a table, because once we made the announcement, people started secretly delivering them. And the Jordanian military intelligence had confiscated some at the border, and they just kept them sitting in a cupboard. And so they then, after we made the announcement, they returned them to the Department of Antiquities. So there was a pile of them, 25, and he said to pick one. So we picked one that was closest to the ones that we'd already seen in Hassan's collection, the Israeli Bedouin, and so we brought it back. And since then, every one of those has disappeared. They're not with the Department of Antiquities. We have no idea where they are. We suspect they've been sold off because, like, it's very corrupt. In certain areas, particularly antiquities, and
let's talk about what we do know. I mean, full disclosure, you've shared with me images that talking about.
The one that I sent to you was the one from the Department of Antiquities.
Why don't we talk about that? Because they are. I think they're not what people might expect in a sense. I don't know what people would expect, but they're quite surprising. You talked about, you said that you felt a power from them, and so on. But they're indisputably strange to look at, I would say, for people who are unfamiliar with this kind of artifact. Is that fair?
Yes. Well, I mean, we had certainly never seen anything like them before, and they are arguably the first book ever in existence, because there's nothing that's been found that's older than the Codices. And some of them, and quite many of them, are sealed on all sides. So basically, they were not meant to be seen. The knowledge was closed within that.
Describe them, if you will. You've handled one of them.
I've handled a lot of them. I've handled quite a few of them. They're different sizes, because there was no kind of set mold like now we have books, and they all are of a standard size. Your paperbacks or your hardbacks, they're a set size that comes out. These, because they were handmade, they're all different sizes, starting from like the size that would fit into the palm of your hand, a tiny square that they would actually put on a cord, these missionaries, and wear around their neck. And then the biggest one is probably like the size of a paperback book. But within that, they're all slightly. None of them are uniform in size.
Anyone who's familiar with a written language, on looking at an image of them, you can see clearly that there are letters. There are shapes that you would understand as being letters, if that's the right word.
Yes.
Is it possible? Is it obvious to see whether, because obviously lead for a lot of people is a soft metal. You'd think of lead as being, so that even if it was a solid rolled out sheet of cold lead, that you could scratch into that with a nail or similar, some sort of stylus. Yeah. Or you described earlier, which I hadn't actually thought about. You described the mention elsewhere of Jesus writing with a stick in the sand and then using that as a photo negative to pour lead into. So are they scratched, or is it possible to discern whether the letters are?
Yeah, it's kind of like Braille. You can touch the letters.
So they're not scratched into something cold. They are the result of a molten state.
Yes, and that way you can't change them. That they can't be edited, which is interesting. And also one of the reasons, because lead is, if you go for like a church roof, even after 600 years, the lead on that roof is still pliable. So by making these in lead, they knew that they were going to last a very long time. And these are, now they're extremely brittle, which takes an extremely long time to happen to lead.
And the mere thought, whatever a person's beliefs, if they have any beliefs, whatever, but the mere thought that, you're making a case, or others with whom you're associated are making the case that these might have been the physical handiwork of the entity Jesus, be he man or be he son of God, or whatever it is that a person wants to think when they hear the name. But the contention is that these artifacts might be his artifacts, made by his hands.
That's very possible, because only the high priest had the knowledge to do that. They had the knowledge, and also it was a very elite, kind of like the guilds that they have now. Only very elite people could make these books, because they were secret, so nobody could see them. And so it would only be the high priest or people with the knowledge that they actually made them themselves.
I'm so filled with questions. I know you've said yourself that, you don't consider yourself to be an expert. You're just, that you've acquired a lot of familiarity with information around this subject. And that's good enough. That's good enough for me in this context to be someone with whom to bounce ideas around. But why would you think that we're talking here about the Word of God, the message from the divine about how we are supposed to live here on earth? Why would that be secret? Why would that not just be, blasted in letters 50 foot high for all the world to see at once? Why secret for anyone?
Well, I think because the information was so powerful that it was potentially dangerous. And because always there's people that don't want these things coming out. Knowledge is power. And I would imagine, although, Jesus did have his ministries and he taught them, and he was also teaching people how to find the divine within themselves. But it's knowledge that you have to have a certain level, I think it's too much to take on board for just somebody, an initiate, to come in and learn, and they wouldn't understand it, because you have to reach a certain level of like an enlightened being to understand what it is. That's just my take on it.
Because there has, for the longest time, been that contention, hasn't there, amongst the intellectual or the initiated or the elite or whatever. That's not just in Christianity, so-called. There is there not, a recurrent theme by which special people are deemed good enough to get knowledge, and for everybody else, there's something that's vanilla ice cream for the masses.
Yes.
You might even call it religion, which is what is offered to the people. Well, at the same time, there's a self-appointed, to some extent, group that thinks, for whatever reason, we're smart enough to know the knowledge.
I think in this, it's more of like protecting something that's sacred, because it's like the expression, you don't throw pearls before swine. And I don't mean that to kind of be offensive to general people, but you can't give something that people aren't going to be able to appreciate, and give like a special knowledge and something that's very sacred and has to be protected. It's something that you have to kind of learn slowly, and you have to kind of earn. And I imagine that's why. And it's you have to, you go through different stages. You can't just, you can't just take it to be too much to take on board. And I think the person wouldn't understand it without going through many stages of learning.
Would that in any way, to fast forward, you mentioned 1800 years or 2000 years or whatever, fast forward to the present day, is that then the in our faces explanation for why we are not supposed to see these? Is it a perpetuation into the modern day of that idea that we cannot let the rank and file know these things exist, far less see them?
There is definitely an element of that. But it's also because a lot of these people just don't understand them themselves. And there's also a lot of ego around them. And because if you don't understand them, then you can't use them to control people. And if people have this knowledge of what's in these codices, then they can think for themselves. But the biggest problem, I think, is that there's just so few people that can actually translate them and understand them. And then it's interpretation. And so they would rather that they just went away, because they're inconvenient, also because there is the biggest problem, because they don't really contradict Christianity, because how could they? I mean, if any religion went against them, then they're going against Jesus. But strangely enough, they do. And but the Catholic Church has been the only kind of religious institution that hasn't condemned them, because they also have scholars that are aware of them. And the funny thing is, because everyone automatically assumes the Catholic Church must hate this because of historically, from the Council of Nicaea to, the Inquisition to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Historically, they have been involved in kind of trying to keep it all undercover, but they've actually been quiet, and a number of their scholars have been supporting it because they actually have the scholarship over many centuries to understand what they are. But they've been quiet about it. And I think but also funnily enough, now they don't need to say anything because the Church of England kind of does their dirty work for them. They're more involved in suppressing these things, and the evangelical Christians than anybody else. And they don't like this because they don't understand them. They can't put them into context. And that's the biggest problem.
I'm almost asking this rhetorically, really. I mean, but an edifice like the Christian faith, the biggest religion on the planet in terms of whatever counted members or whatever, ought, you would imagine, to be so confident, in their faith and in their knowledge that nothing, like far less 25 or 30 lead books found in a cave, ought to challenge them at all. What I mean is, why would they not just, in a great spirit of benevolence, just lay these open and say to the world, make of these what you will, but we are the representatives here on earth of Christianity, and we'll tell you what we think. But by all means, have a look. Why not? Why would they be so threatened by 25 lead books the size of playing cards?
Well, I don't think that they're actually so threatened by the books themselves, because they have the knowledge to kind of be able to adapt it to however they want to present it. And we've certainly never been telling anybody, preaching how they should be perceived any faith, because that's not my role. But I think it's much more political than it is actual religious, because at the end of the day, they just are the first tangible evidence that Jesus actually existed, because one of the codices has his face on it, and it would have been a rendering made in his lifetime. And so that it can only be good because it proves the historical Jesus. And, I don't think it isn't, and people that hear about this are excited about it of all faiths, because people are interested in our history, and it fascinated that these are found, and they don't see it as a contradiction. And in fact, they aren't, because if you are a Christian and you believe in the message of Jesus, then this can't, affect that in any way. And it only supports it. There are differences, maybe historically, certain things. Was Jesus married? Was he not married? Was he, maybe contextual things, but ultimately none of that really matters if you believe in the man and his word, which was the most important thing to him, was his word.
What does the image of Jesus look like?
It's very similar to the Shroud of Turin. Very similar. And it's in a very small book, which is a little bit bigger than a card, like you mentioned. And it's believed to be the book of Revelation, according to Dr. Margaret Barker, who is one of the most eminent scholars of this field of study, her temple studies. And she believes that because the book actually has 7 seals on it. And on the inside of that book is a depiction of Jesus as the risen Christ. And it's very, very remarkable. So, and this is, if it is what she believes to be the book of Revelation, I mean, it's extraordinary that nobody's done anything about it and to try and protect it.
Who else? You mentioned this woman. Who else, for context, has seen that image, and what has been their reaction to it? Because unless and until I haven't seen the image, and I certainly haven't held the thing in the palm of my hand and looked at it in real time. But who else has seen this, and what do they say?
Well, some very eminent scholars have. The late Professor Philip Davies from the Dead Sea Scrolls, who he was very circumspect, because scholars are, but he, did off the record believe them to be real. And he said that, because of the hysteria and the attacks and everything around them, then if they were really fake, why are these people getting so upset? And it just doesn't make sense. And there's also a lot of references in the Bible to books. It just that before, when there was no context for them, nobody really picked up on it. But also the Professor Bernhard Lang, who's a Professor Emeritus as well. He's from the University of St. Andrews, University of Paderborn. He's also a Vatican priest and a Vatican scholar. He absolutely believes them to be Hebrew Christian and believes them to be what they are. He supports Dr. Barker's theory on that. So it's the very eminent ones that are quiet that believe that. And it's the other ones, these kind of loud American evangelical scholars, that most of them are very young and they want to make names for themselves. And because they can't make a name for themselves studying them, they've tried to make a name for themselves by debunking them. And it's, but they are very much supported by eminent scholars. And, they have come out as well in the media and supported them. And as well as one of the big supporters, too, was the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, who we met with on 5 different occasions. The first one when he was actually Archbishop, but he couldn't come out and say anything because it's very political, and we appreciated that. It was, he had to be very careful in that position. But he knew exactly what they were. He just listed off all kinds of references from various ancient sources.
It's a strange one. I'm listening intently. It's a strange one. As I said, whatever an individual contemplates or believes when they hear the name Jesus, I don't think anybody, why would anyone dispute his having walked the earth? Whether you believe him to be the incarnated, the Son of God, or you believe him just to be a man, whether you believe him to be a man who had a message that he wanted to impart, I can't really understand any manifestation or iteration of the church that claims to exist in the name of Jesus, not wanting to know more about something purporting to be of his hand. Whether if the man walked the earth and made some words on lead that has survived for all of this time, wouldn't they be all in on that rather than in any way wanting to dispute
probably, the biggest surprise of all was, well, for me, was that I thought that the church and these scholars would embrace it and be so excited because this is something new to study, and it was the exact opposite reaction. And although some of the scholars were excited about it, but their scholars are very shy. A lot of them are cowards. They won't put, a couple of them on our team were very brave, and they did put themselves out there, but a lot of them won't because and also they're just very cautious. They want to do a lot of research before they will do anything, which is understandable because there is a lot of, first you have to translate them and then you have to interpret them. And it is a lot of work. It's research. It's going to go on for many years, and there will be many different interpretations of that. And they'll argue, and, even, the little bit that I've said, I'll be dismissed and kind of poo-pooed.
Oh, of course. You and I, anyone, that obviously.
But I'm not anybody, and I'm not putting myself out there as a scholar at all. But I am repeating some of the things that I have heard from scholars because I have been involved in this for many years and I've listened to it. But it is very surprising that, but it's not unusual. So many discoveries have been suppressed. If you start with even the Gospels in the Council of Nicaea in 325, when so many of the Gospels that were inconvenient were excised. And then, you go to the Inquisition, where the Cathars who had an alternative view, or anyone that had an alternative view of doctrine or dogma, they were tortured or burned. And, and after that, nobody's going to want to come forward with any alternative views. And then kind of more in the modern times, even as of the 20th century, like Sir Flinders Petrie came back he went to an exhibition
Now he's a bona fide archaeologist, and he's in the pantheon. He's in the pantheon, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the beginning of archaeology being a hot pursuit. And he was kind of the father of modern archaeology. And it was in 1904 he had an expedition funded by Christian group, which for the people that did that, to Serabit al-Qadim in the Sinai Peninsula. And he went with his team. And that's an area typically associated with biblical history and notably with Moses. And he went up there, and what he found was a temple to Hathor and a lot of Egyptian tools and stelae and crucibles. And he was very excited about all this, packed it all up and took it back and to the British Museum. And it was immediately, we took it in crates, and he was told that it was to remain sealed and never to be opened because it was a very inconvenient what they found. And so it was only laterally.
Exactly in the manner of what happens in the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, when the Ark ends up in a crate in a warehouse.
Oh, so many things in the British Museum and the vaults. I mean, it's huge, it's vast, and so many things. And I think now they're just kind of created there because there's so much that they just have forgotten. Because Lawrence Gardner, the author who I worked with, he actually managed to get a list of everything that was in that crate from that expedition because he was doing research on one of his books. And he gave me a copy of that, and it's still secreted, but they didn't realize that because so much time has gone by that nobody even remembers that it was ordered not to be opened. And I think these are just sitting there because nobody can be bothered. They don't even know what's there, or so much is there. But there was that, and then in 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and those were held under embargo for 50 years. And those were also suppressed, and they were basically the translations were determined between, it was a Father DeVoe who was the head of the team that led the archaeology and the translations for the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Israel, and they worked together to determine that they were Jewish, when in actuality they're actually proto-Christian, which is also why there's a political aspect to this too, because the codices predate the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they kind of intimate that the Dead Sea Scrolls, or more than intimate, are actually proto-Christian because the codices are. So it's very political, and that's, I think, more of a reason why this has remained suppressed, is for political reasons much more than religious reasons, and also because a lot of these scholars have built their theses and their careers, and a lot of them make money in America. These evangelical scholars, they do documentaries, and they have enormous egos. And if this comes out, it kind of discredits a lot of their work. In fact,
there is, isn't there? Though, I mean, I'm not an academic. Goes without saying, I'm not an academic. But there is a culture within academe where I think they operate, don't they, with a kind of an unspoken understanding that nobody's next big thing is going to upset the apple cart completely.
Well, that's exactly it. And when
they don't do that, they just nudge things little.
You can't do that. It's like you're out of the club if you do that. But we showed the Book of Revelation, the one with the face of Jesus on it, the Codex, to Professor James Mackey, who sadly passed away, and he was Professor Emeritus at the University of Edinburgh, and also the teacher of Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury. And he just looked at it, and he was very quiet, and then he just kind of laughed. He said, well, there goes 40 years of scholarship down the drain. And he could say that because he was retired, but he said, you're going to have a hell of a time with academics, because he knew that, and that's exactly what happened. And Rowan Williams said that too. He said, that they'll never accept this. And it's all about their egos and mainly what it is. And they're a very close group. And also, we've had a very big problem because university funders, particularly in biblical studies, are typically like Christian backing. So if they don't toe the line, and one of the professors that was a Hebraist at the University of Durham was told that he had anything to do with the codices, they would axe his pension. So
I set a lot of store by the line. I think to me, I'll say it, the most important line in the New Testament or in the Bible is the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. I mean, I think if I could only, for me, if I was as a scholar, if I could only save one line from that book, that's the one. Because, whenever the light shines, inspiration, the truth, a great idea, there's this wave of darkness has an instinct to suppress it because it doesn't comprehend it.
Well, that's it. And it's an ego. If you can't understand something, you just kind of dismiss it and make fun of it so that, and that's exactly what's happened. And they've been doing that. But we are winning because at the end of the day, there's the age of the internet where they can't keep these things secret anymore. And it's also the general public are interested in this. And even though there's certain people that have been particularly bad, and I say that about evangelical scholars, and there's some Mormon scholars that have been particularly bad, and the hierarchy. But I don't condemn any of these people that follow these religions because they're people that just want to be good and they want to know the truth, and they're trusting in their leaders to deliver that. And if they didn't hear these negative things from their leaders about the codices, they would. And everyone's reaction has been excitement because people want to know, but.
Why would you suppress? When in many respects, the faith of Christianity is a bit. It's gone a bit flat. The pop has gone out of it for a lot of people. Why would you not welcome something that would inject excitement? My wife and I, when we were teenagers, really, we ran across the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, the bestseller of the
Henry Lincoln,
the Henry Lincoln Agent, and we were just transfixed by it. I had to go and buy my own copy of it because Trudy couldn't put up with me reading it over her shoulder the way I was doing, and that just out of that excited curiosity, that set both of us off. And the amount of stuff I've read over the years about Rennes le Chateau and the Cathars.
And why was the Da Vinci Code such a huge, phenomenally popular? Because people want to know the truth. And they're fascinated by the fact that we've had truth withheld from us. And even people that aren't religious were fascinated by that. Because even if you're not religious, religious history is still history. And it's part of our culture. It's, even like the American motto, "In God we trust," is on our money. It's part of our culture. Yeah. And so people want to know these things, and they want to know why they've been lied to, even if they're not particularly religious. They think, well, what's to this what could be so bad that they were so desperate to kind of keep us from knowing this knowledge.
People, I've made a living out of making history documentaries. I don't do it anymore, but and people want at the time, Braveheart. The Mel Gibson, Oscar-winning, rendition of, William Wallace's fight for Scottish independence. And people to this day talk to me about, but doesn't it upset you that the history's not, canonically expressed, that it plays fast and loose? And I said and still say no, because what it did was bring millions of people who would not have given Scottish history a moment's thought. Mm-hmm. It brought them into the subject. And then some of those people, duly inspired by the fiction, would go and look at it from themselves and then make up their own minds about what actually happened and how faithful the film was to it. But why would you not? Like you mentioned the Da Vinci Code. People, say, oh, but it's just pulp fiction and so on and so on. Yeah, but
there was an element of truth to it too. There was an element of truth, and people knew that. They knew that there was some truth to it, whether it was exactly as was presented, maybe not, but there's enough of, an element of it that people knew that there's an alternative view to what we've been told.
Surely open-minded people, or within the faith and without the faith, but if people well-motivated, confronted with this kind of information, would surely just want to know more. Just tell me more. As soon as I came across you and you made me aware of that, tell me more. I definitely need to know more.
Well, I think that's a general response that people have. It's the hierarchies that are the ones that controlling it that don't want it coming out. And they're not really interested in it at all. They're just interested in keeping the information suppressed. But the general public is very interested, because I think people are curious, and I think we have a natural inclination to want to know the truth. It's just part of our makeup. And so when we're not told the truth, we instinctively know it, and that we want to find out what the truth is. And it's becomes a big, like the Da Vinci Code or like Braveheart. It provokes people, and it also makes you think, well, what else is it that it's being hidden from us? And there's so much that's being hidden from us, just so much. I've come across within this work, people in other fields and in other archaeological discoveries where amazing things have been covered up. Well, and in more kind of esoteric things, UFOs, whether it's all sorts of things, there's been massive cover-ups. So why are everyone's so scared of kind of disrupting the status quo?
To come back to you, you think that you went public, as it were, in 2011, but there were some years prior to that you'd been made aware of, the existence of these artifacts, and you're still in there swinging. And despite, I know that you've been the target of an enormous, I'm no stranger to ridicule and the rest of it myself, so I do know what it's like. But what's kept you in the game?
The truth. And that's what's kept me in the game, is the truth. And I feel if it hadn't been me, I would kind of want someone else to keep fighting for that truth, because I think everybody has a right to know their heritage and what this comes from. And I think particularly now, it's just this time in history, we need it more than anything, that the spiritual message that could come from this, and that because Christianity has been so corrupted and twisted and used for political ends now that it's recognizable in any form to the Christianity of Jesus. And I think, which is more of a spiritual, it's not even religion, it's just spirituality. And I think I'm much more attracted by that now, even though I grew up with kind of a very religious, I've more veered away from that. I still go to church and I still love to hear the music. And I just, sometimes things that are said, I just know in my mind, some things I discard and other things I enjoy listening to. So you kind of get, but.
And now more than ever, when anyone pays attention at all for 5 minutes to what's happening in the so-called Holy Land, and what's being done, what's being done to people, just people, regardless whether they be Christian, Muslim, Jewish, what's being done to people.
Well, that's what
in the name of Jesus.
Well, that's the crazy thing. And these codices, they actually, because their liturgy originates from the first Temple of Solomon. That predates Christianity, all three Abrahamic religions, the Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So basically, they should be a unifying thing for everybody to come together. But the powers that be don't want people to be unified, because they have more control over people when they're divided. So, but I think that's just the powers that be. But I think the average person would very much welcome this message to unify everybody, because it's crazy. And even in the Islamic faith, they have a huge respect for Jesus as a prophet. And it's interesting because there are also there's a group that I came across a number of years ago, which I found quite funny, but it's not in a making fun of way, but Jews for Jesus. And now there's a group of Islamists that are also supporting Jesus. So it's kind of interesting that he's still like a unifying figure, even amongst the different religions. There are groups, and I think I'm hoping more and more people will come, because it's kind of like Buddhism. He was never saw himself as the head of a religion. He was just trying to teach people how to find spirituality within themselves. And I think that would be a welcome message to everybody, because if everyone took that on board and became responsible for themselves, their actions, treated people kindly, we'd be in a much better place. Not something that can be shared with everybody. It's not specific to any religion.
We should talk more about this, Jennifer. I'd like very much to, even broaden it out. With the things we've touched on within the hour, all need conversations by themselves, and also that I think we could have further conversations involving more than just you and me. Bringing some of your colleagues that are so immersed in this.
Very much so.
And please, we'll make sure, Paul and I'll make sure that there's links within this video, beneath this video, if you can point us in a direction where people can find out more, just the stuff. Just let people go and have a look at things for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, because we have two websites that, and one of them, the leadcodices.com, that you can find out, basic information. There's been press in there and images for people that wanted to look at it. Then if people are more interested in the science side of things, is newmansociety.org and NUMEN society.org. And that kind of gives a lot of the heavyweight papers and presentations on the science front that we've been doing for about 14 years.
Fantastic. Jennifer, it's been a real pleasure. It's history that has always been what has driven my curiosity. And this branch of history, your religious history, biblical history, it really piques my interest. And so it's just been a huge pleasure to briefly skim across the surface of something so deep.
I think I'm so grateful to you for giving me this opportunity, because it's literally, I haven't had one. And every time we've been in the media, it's been very skewed, and there's been no opportunity to have, really have a voice in this. And so I very much appreciate it, because I think the public needs to know about this, because I think once they realize, what discovery could represent, I think there'll be a great interest in it.
I think so too, Jennifer. We'll do more of this, but for just now, I think that's been I think we've opened the door there, or opened the book. So let's do more soon.
Okay, fantastic.